Hello and good morning, my lovely morbid friends. How are you today? So I hope you're having a lovely one today. Now, today's case, we're going to be talking about Michael Bruce Ross. Who is he, you ask? Well, he's an American serial killer and he was executed in 2005. So before we get into, his execution and all that jazz, let's talk about who he was. So, Michael Bruce Ross was born on July 26 in 1959 to Patricia Lane and Dan Ross. He was the oldest of four children. He had two younger sisters and a younger brother. They lived on a chicken farm in Brooklyn, Connecticut. So, his parents were forced to marry because his mother got pregnant. So, even before, his very tumultuous childhood, he already wasn't wanted by his mom. So there it already starts where he's going to have a messed up life. And not a lot of people that read about serial killers actually go into their childhood, which they should, because you'll learn a lot more from these people when it comes to their childhood. But anywho, so his home life was extremely dysfunctional. His mother had abandoned them at least once, and that was after she ran away with another man. And after she came back, his father had her institutionalized. Now, it is said that she would beat all four of her children, but she saved her worst treatment for Michael because he was the oldest. So, and this is also the child that forced her into marriage, into living on a chicken farm, which she absolutely despised farm life. She was that young, I want to be a city gal, just wanted to live her own life. That's who she was. Some friends and family suggested that he was also molested by his teenage uncle. Well, this uncle in particular is the one that taught him how to kill chickens on the farm. And also, this uncle committed suicide when Ross was 6. So there's a death in his early years where it's unclear whether or not he truly was molested by him. Even with all of that horrible upbringing, he was a very bright boy. He performed well in school. He was well liked in school. I mean, he did exhibit some antisocial behavior from a very young age, but coming from his background of that extreme abuse, it's gonna be known that, and he's gonna exhibit some weird behavioral traits. He would eventually graduate from Killingly High School in Killingly, Connecticut in 1977, and from there he would attend Cornell University in Ithaca. And this is where he studied agriculture and would eventually graduate in May of 1981. After graduating, he would become an insurance salesman. But while he was in college, he was involved in a romantic relationship with a woman, and this woman in particular, she became pregnant, and this was during their sophomore year of college. And after she found out she was pregnant, she aborted the pregnancy. This created a lot of strain on Michael's mind, and really is what was that turning point for him to change, kind of make that gradual change into, I'm not just a weird person that's antisocial. I need to do something because something extremely wrong has happened to me. And not just to me, to my unborn child. And it's during his sophomore year where he began to stalk women. This was right after his girlfriend aborted their pregnancy. And also in his senior year, he would commit his first rape, and his first murder would soon follow after that. Even though he was very bright, he let that dark side of him kind of just like take over and run rampant with his mind, which happens to a lot of serial killers. They let that inner voice finally come out and take over, and unfortunately that's what happened with Michael. So Michael was very, like, not to say picky, he had a specific, like, age group that he really liked when it came to his victims, and that was between 14 to 25. So his first victim he has is a fellow Cornell University student, and her name is Zung Nok Tu. She was 25. She is the oldest of his victims. She was murdered on May 12th of 1981, so this is right before he would graduate from college. And there's also a gap between his first murder and his second murder. So my belief when it comes to gaps in murders is because the person either has satiated part of their thirst or in their hunger to commit such a tragic crime, or something happened to them where they needed to move to a different area. But like with other serial killers, there's gaps in their killings. Like sometimes they satiate their taste and hunger just for a little bit, and then they can prolong in between each crime. Some killers can't because they just have that overwhelming feeling, or there's different circumstances in between that has happened to cause such a like time gap. I think he was either moved due to work. That's why there's gaps in these murders. And I do know that he is a possible suspect in Indiana for rapes and murders there, that he probably moved to Indiana, or he was sent there for work. There's a whole bunch of different things that could have happened. So his next victim would be Paula Pereira, and she was 16, of Wallkill, New York, and she was murdered in March of 1982. And this one, I believe that he traveled back to New York, either for work or to visit, like, a friend or something like that. And he went back to New York, saw Paula, and murdered her. His next victim would be, well, his first one in 1982. I missed one, sorry. Her name is Tammy Williams, and she's 17, of Brooklyn, Connecticut. This happened on January 5th of 1982. So we have, we have Paula in March and Tammy in January. And his previous one was in May of the previous year. So that is quite the gap between murders. And plus two, with Paula being killed in New York and Tammy being killed in Brooklyn, Connecticut, it kind of like, you see what I mean with the moving back and forth? But his next victim would be Deborah Smith Taylor. She was 23, of Griswold, and she was murdered by Michael on June 15th of 1982. And his next murder wouldn't be until the following year. So his next one is very sad. Her name is Robin Stavinsky. Not like any of the other ones are sad. I don't mean to sound like a rude and obnoxious person by saying that. But this one happened, unfortunately, on Thanksgiving Day. Her name is Robin Stavinsky. She's 19, and she's from Norwich, Connecticut. So he basically accosted her on the grounds of the state hospital in Norwich. Then he forcefully pulled her into a wooded area, ordered her to remove her clothing, and then he proceeded to sexually assault her. After doing so, he ordered her to turn over onto her stomach, and then he strangled her. He then covered her body with leaves, and he left. Our next case, I'm going to save the two that happened on the same day after Wendy, which is his final victim. So I'm going to skip over April Brunei and Leslie Shelley. I'll come back to them in a second. So his final murder that he committed was Wendy Barabolt, and she was 17, from Griswold, Connecticut. She was murdered on June 13th of 1984. So he, again, would accost Wendy while she was walking along Route 12 in Lisbon. After they had a very short conversation, he pulled her over a stone wall. He forced her to go into a wooded area that led to an open field, where he would then sexually assault her, force her to turn over onto her stomach, and then proceed to strangle her. So this would become his MO of sexual assault and then strangulation. His two that he murdered on the same day, the reason why I wanted to keep these together is because they are the youngest victims that he has. So April Brunei and Leslie Shelley are both 14, and they're from Griswold, Connecticut. They were both murdered on Easter Sunday, April 22nd, 1984. So he picked them up while they were hitchhiking on Route 138. Once the girls entered his car, he then proceeded to drive them over to, like, past where they needed to go. So April tried to force him to stop driving and threatened him with a knife, but he was quick to disarm her, and then he continued driving into Rhode Island. So when he was driving into Rhode Island, he stopped at a pond with a beach, parked his car. He bound both of the girls by their hand and their feet. He then would untie April and force her to walk a shorter distance from the car, leaving Leslie in his car. And this is when he would sexually assault her, turn her over on her stomach, and strangle her. He would then proceed to return to the car, where he would kill Leslie, but he did not sexually assault her. He would then place both of their bodies in his car, drove back to Preston, Connecticut, where he would deposit their bodies in a culvert. If you don't know what a culvert is, basically it's a giant metal pipe that goes underneath a road to let water through underneath it. That's what a culvert is. In 1984, this is when he would be arrested. And he would definitely change in a quite a weird, in a strange way. Also, Michael was alleged to have raped another woman, and her name was Vivian Dobson, and she said that he raped her in 1983. But the Plainfield, Connecticut police rejected the possibility of him being her rapist. They didn't press any charges, and Ross never confessed to that. So he was arrested on June 29th of 1984. So it's not very long after Wendy was murdered when he was arrested. And when he was arrested, he would eventually confess to 8 of the murders, but he was only convicted of the last 4. So he would be convicted and he would be sentenced to death. And while he was incarcerated, he would meet his fiancée. Her name is Susan Powers. She was from Oklahoma. She would eventually break up with him in 2003, but she would continue to visit him until he died. After he became incarcerated, he became a devout Catholic, and he would meet with priests regularly throughout the years. They would pray to the rosary each morning. They would do Bible study. He really turned to his faith after being locked up. It's also known during this time he would translate documents into Braille, and he acted as a mentor for other inmates, and it would eventually sponsor a child from the Dominican Republic financially. He really tried to turn over a new leaf and to finally do some good in his life, rather than just dwell on all the negative that he's created throughout his entire life. So Michael would eventually have a stay of execution. So Michael was at peace with his sentence. He believed he had been forgiven by God and that he was going to a better place once he was executed. And he strongly supported his death sentence. He said that he wanted to spare his victims' families from any more pain and not have to bring them to trial again. And this was mentioned by a woman named Catherine Yeager, who was also a Cornell graduate, somebody that he spoke to. Catherine would also say that he's not being punished, he's moving to life eternal. And this is what's ironic about the death penalty, because he's looking forward to the peace after being put to death, because then he doesn't have to be judged as him as a serial killer. His spirit can become anew. And again, Catherine would reiterate what Michael is saying, whereas he came to believe that there was no way his death sentence would ever be commuted without forcing his victims' families to suffer more through more legal hearings. And he knew his life would be meaningful even behind bars. He had a horrible life, and he always wanted to do good, and which is what he did after he went to jail, is he tried to do good. So, in spite of everything that Michael wanted, his lawyer, because of Michael's dad, obtained a 2-day stay of execution, and this was January 26th of 2005. So he was scheduled to be executed on January 29th by lethal injection, but because of that two-day stay of execution, it prolonged it. So the reason why his dad got this is because they doubted his mental competency, and because he spent so long fighting his death sentence and then suddenly waived it, they thought it was strange. His lawyer claimed that he was incompetent to waive his rights, and he was just suffering from death row syndrome. Like, because he was on death row for so long, he just didn't care. But for Michael, this was just a way for his dad to just kind of like halt his impending doom. It didn't stop him from reaching another goal of his. So Michael would become an oblate or an associate of the Benedictine Grange, which was a Roman Catholic monastic community in West Reading, Connecticut. And this would be the final good thing that he would do for himself while he was in prison. He would be finally executed on May 13th in 2005 at Osborne Correctional Institution in Somers, Connecticut. He was 45 years old. He did not request a last meal before his execution. He instead ate the same thing that everybody else ate for the day, which would be turkey a la king with rice, mixed veggies, white bread, fruit, and a beverage. Before he was brought into the chamber to be hooked up for his lethal injection, they asked him if he would like to make a last statement. Now, he had his eyes closed and said no thank you, and proceeded to walk in. Ross would be pronounced dead at 2:25 a.m. on May 13th, and his remains would then be buried at the Benedictine Grange Cemetery in Reading, Connecticut. So after he was executed, a psychiatrist named Dr. Stuart Gratian, he argued that Ross was incompetent to waive his appeal. He also received a letter that was dated for May 10th, 2005, which read, "Check and mate, you never had a chance." And this was written by Michael. Also, what is important about his execution is that Michael was the first execution in Connecticut, and specifically in New England, since 1960. And it was also the first and only in Connecticut administered by lethal injection. As of June 2020, he is the most recent inmate executed in Connecticut since they abolished the death penalty on April 25th of 2012. So Vivian Dobson, that victim that alleged that he raped her, became a vocal opponent of the death penalty in order to save his life. So she tried, even though she alleged that he raped her, she tried to help him avoid the death penalty. His execution was the first in Connecticut in 2005, the first execution in Connecticut since 1960, the 22nd execution in the United States in 2005, and the 966th execution in the U.S. since 1976. So, and he is also a suspect in other rapes and murders in the state of Indiana, too. He, more prominently, people have made movies about him, and he has been, like, shown on British television series and different portrayals about his case. And he didn't really have a nickname. The media is the one that gave him his nickname, which was the Roadside Strangler, because the girls were strangled off the side of the road. Or the Eggman, because he grew up on a chicken farm. He was never called this nickname while he was alive, which would just be something that the media would be able to control after all of this case came out and dub him as a certain nickname. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next video, which is the 25 days of true crime. Yay! So I hope you're all excited, my lovely morbid friends. It's gonna be a good one. Bye!